I've been in education for over 10 years. And one of my favorite things is being able to help students feel a little less stressed around the process of college admissions, because I know it can be a very stressful time. You'll see on the screen my contact information. So if you do have any questions, like anything that's maybe a little more niche or specific just to you, that you want to ask separately, you can certainly send me an email. And then tomorrow also we'll send you a copy of the slide deck and the recording, and it'll come from this email as well. All right, so before we really get into it, I want you to pretend for a minute that you are a college admissions officer, right? So you have to evaluate hundreds of applications that are coming in from all across the country. You're looking at students from urban schools and rural schools, students from large schools and small schools, students that are going to public schools, private schools, suburban and urban schools. You're comparing essays. Students have written on a variety of different subjects, all different perspectives. You're looking at student activity lists, and everybody's doing different things. They have different interests, different extracurriculars, different leadership roles, right, within these activities, and sorting through it is incredibly difficult. And that's what makes college admissions officers' jobs so tough. But there is one thing that admissions officers can use that is fairly simple to evaluate, and it's one thing that can be easily compared from one application to another, and that is standardized test scores. Now, we know, I'm sure you know, and if you don't, let me remind you that standardized test scores are not a perfect assessment of a student's abilities, and they don't even always show a student in their best light. But they do provide a single number that the admissions officers can look at when comparing applications. And that's why it's really important to have those strong SAT or ACT scores. So today we're really going to go over three main objectives here, three main topics. We're going to talk about the truths and misconceptions about the SAT or the ACT. We're also going to talk about some of the similarities and differences. The great thing is that there are more similarities than differences, which is pretty good. And you'll see that when we get to that section. And then the third part will be improving scores. So we'll have some tips and tricks to improve your scores on either test. And so that by the time that we're done today, you're going to feel more comfortable, more confident, knowing what you need to know about the tests and using the tests to help you get into the school of your dreams that you want to get into. We're not going to go over every little detail of the test because, you know, we only have a certain amount of time together, but we're going to cover a great deal to get together today. All right, so first we're going to dive into the truths and misconceptions. We hear them all the time at the Princeton Review, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of them too. Like maybe you've heard that certain schools will only take SAT or ACT scores, one or the other, right? Maybe if you're better at math or better at science, then you should take one or the other. We're going to forget all that. We really need to kind of think about it from like a further out lens. So we're going to step back and think about how these tests are, how they matter in the college admissions process, and do they still matter? So do SAT and ACT scores still matter? And a lot of you probably know this, that during the COVID-19 pandemic, there were lockdowns, there were school closures. Too soon, really, I feel like, to be even revisiting this, but students had difficulty taking an ACT or an SAT because they were unable to do so, like physically unable to take a test. So a lot of schools waived their testing requirement, but a lot of that was temporary. And there are some schools that have kept that test optional policy. Some of them are permanent, but we're going to talk a little bit about schools that do and don't require tests. So this is our book, The Best 388 Colleges. You can find it on Amazon. We also have a lot of this information right on our website, so you can certainly check it out. But we asked in this book, we asked the schools about their testing policies regarding the SAT and the ACT, and we grouped them into 4 categories to help kind of break it down and make it a little easier to look at. So the first category are the schools with the test required policies, and that means that the students have to submit an SAT or an ACT score to be considered for admission. The second category is test flexible. So it doesn't mean that you have to submit SAT or ACT scores, but you'll need to either submit some test score or meet some other type of criteria. Then the third is test optional. And that's what a lot of us are hearing about now, that test optional policy. So the schools will review your scores if you submit them, but you don't have to include them on your application. And then we have test-free schools, and those are schools that aren't going to consider scores at all. They're not going to look at them. They want nothing to do with them. And so that's what test-free is. So here's the breakdown that we have there. So 6% of schools are fully required. 3% of the schools have that test flexible. 85% of the schools have that test optional. And then there's that 7% that's test-free. So it's become very common for people to say now, oh, like so few schools require me to take the SAT or the ACT. They think that that makes you think your scores don't matter anymore, but it's not really a good way to go thinking about it, because most college admissions offices are still going to consider your test scores. They're still going to use them in the process, and you really want to have scores that are going to be strong for those admissions officers to look at. So if you apply to even one single school that requires testing or wants to see your scores, then you're going to have to take the test. So it's best to look at it that way and think about being prepared so that you can get the best score possible for you. So 93% of the schools in the best 388 still want to see those scores, and they're still looking to see those high test scores. Of course, they want to see strong everything on your application, but they're really going to be looking to see, are you getting that 1350, 1400 compared to a 1000? Another thing that schools do is super scoring. So they'll take your highest individual section score. So like if you've taken that SAT, for example, multiple times, the highest math score that you've gotten out of the 3, for example, test administrations you've taken, and then your highest writing and language section, and they'll combine them to give you the highest overall score. So that's great for students, but it also allows colleges to report higher average scores. So that's something to keep in mind. Those test optional and test flexible policies, they allow students to really submit the strong scores. So, if your score isn't so strong, you might not want to submit it. So really the higher scores are what are being submitted now. So that's something to keep in mind. And, the colleges are not ignoring the standardized tests as much as I'm sure we would all like for that to be the case. I was not a great test taker myself, so I completely understand that. That can feel frustrating when you see that test optional, but it's just a good frame of mind to stay in, to think, okay, we're going to make sure that, I'm going to be prepared for this test to do the best that I can. All right, so how is test optional? So we're going to look at a policy just as an example from Stanford. Stanford adopted their test optional policy for the 2020-2021 school year, and then extended it a year. And a lot of schools have been that way, obviously with the pandemic. So if you see what it says on the slide there, they'll review applications with or without ACT or SAT scores, and they'll leave the decision in the score of the applicant. Interesting though, now for the next year, you'll see this for the freshmen or first year students application requirements, where it says standardized testing is one of the application requirements that can highlight academic preparedness. So if you were to search the web for Stanford standardized testing, you're going to be sent to a page about the freshman application requirements. And it will say that it is one of the application requirements that can highlight the academic preparedness. So if you want to see the statement that is above, you're going to have to click on, there's like a special notice about the changes due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So when you look at it like this, it's not like warm and fuzzy, like, ooh, they don't really want my test scores. It kind of highlights the fact that they're looking for those scores, right? There have been students that have gotten in absolutely in the last 2 years without submitting their scores, but you can tell that the admissions office is clearly telling you that they really do want to see your scores and they want those scores to be strong. Stanford is not they don't have the same policy as all other schools. There are many test optional policies that are truly test optional. But you always want to check the school's website to see what they say about their policies. Now, you're not going to know if your scores will make a difference in the admissions process at a test optional school until you actually have your scores. So you want to keep that in mind, and also keep in mind that your scores can help earn you money. So taking the tests do have their advantages. All right, so we were saying that standardized tests can make that difference, like with some financial aid. So first, there are some state funded scholarships. And for those, a lot of the time there's a minimum SAT or ACT score for those state funded scholarships. And we're going to talk about ROTC scholarships. So a lot of students go this route, and there's another way that you can get money for college, but again, must achieve a certain SAT or ACT scores. And these scholarships can be used to pay for college, obviously, but they're even accepted at schools like the University of California. And University of California, all 9 campuses, they're all test free, but they'll still accept that scholarship. So even if you're applying to a school that's test free, in order to earn some of that money, you might still need to take the SAT or ACT. And then, of course, there's a National Merit Scholarship, and that requires an SAT or ACT score as well. So you qualify through the PSAT exam, but finalists have to show proof of a similar SAT or ACT score in order to actually receive that scholarship. And that scholarship can be used at any school, if it's test blind, test optional, test free, whatever. So reasons to take the test, even if the schools that you're applying to aren't necessarily looking for test scores. We want to keep in mind that these tests are still relevant in the selection of students to join these colleges, but they also can be that little bit of boost to getting some extra financial aid for school. All right, so this is going to cover our first little fun Q&A session in the chat. So we're gonna play a little truth or dare, or true and false game, not truth or dare. And we're going to see what it's like, what standardized tests measure, right? So I would love to tell you that there are no wrong answers in this game, but unfortunately I can't. We see the wrong answers all the time. And we want to make sure that you know the right answer so that you're going in fully informed and not stressed. Okay, so the first question, and you can pop your answers in the chat, and Rebecca will let me know what you guys are saying. So, do college admissions tests like the ACT or SAT measure your intelligence? What do you think? Love to know. True or false? I see the chat. Some stuff's popping up in there. We got anything, Rebecca?
We have some mixed answers, some true and false.
All right, cool. So it's good. This is good because we're all going to learn something here. The answer is false. How well you do on the SAT or ACT has nothing to do with how smart you are, how creative you are, how talented you are. What is it really measuring? It's really measuring how well you take the test. If you get a 1500 on the SAT or a 34 on the ACT, it means you're a great test taker. If you don't get such a high score, it might mean that you're not such a good test taker. And these are tests that are, this is a weird sentence, but these are tests that are testing your test taking ability. And they have to be that way in order to be standardized, because students all over the world who have taken different classes and all that, we're comparing students from all over the place. So it's trying to keep it standardized, but it really is just measuring how well you take the test, which we're going to talk about how that's an advantage for you because it can be prepared for. All right, next question. Does the SAT and or ACT reflect your high school GPA? So if you do well on the SAT or ACT, is that going to kind of be an indicator that, oh, you had good grades too? Do we have any consensus?
Majority is false.
Okay, great. You are correct. It is false. So not at all. How you do on the SAT or ACT is not reflective of your GPA at all. You have to think that the half of the SAT is math, right? And math is one class among many classes that you're taking in school. So if you're not strong in math, that puts you kind of at a disadvantage for a test that's half math. Your high school GPA is also based on a bunch of other things, including coursework and essays and projects and participation, as well as tests. The SAT and ACT are just tests. These aren't high school tests, though. These are college admissions tests, and that's going to lead us to our next question. Do standardized tests predict your college GPA? So if you do really well on the SAT or ACT, does that indicate how well you'll do in college? What do we think?
Majority so far is true.
Okay. All right, I won't keep you in suspense. False. So this one's kind of surprising, but it's interesting to share this because the SAT and ACT scores actually do a worse job of predicting a student's college GPA than even reflecting your high school GPA. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Once you're in college, you're focusing on things that you're good at and that you enjoy within your major. And that means you're likely to do better in college than in high school. Even if you're a great student, it just, makes sense. You're doing things that you enjoy and you're more focused on as far as your interests. You'll also be taking fewer tests in college than you did in high school. So test taking is not going to be as important of a skill. And then finally, one more question. Will they test what you've learned in high school? So do the SAT and the ACT let you know or cover what you've learned in high school? What do you think?
Majority is true.
Okay. All right. Let's see. All right. So this one, when I said there's all like right or wrong answers to this. This one's a little bit of a mixed bag. There's definitely going to be things on the SAT and the ACT that you've learned in high school, like the Pythagorean theorem is always going to come up, basic grammar principles for sure. But some of the stuff you may have learned even well before high school, like in middle school. But the thing to keep in mind is that the content isn't what makes the standardized test difficult. It's that they're completely different from the tests that you're used to in high school. And that's what makes them so challenging. So the tests that you're used to taking in high school are very different than standardized tests like the SAT, the ACT, the PSAT, AP exams. Your high school tests follow a certain pattern, right? They cover limited subject matter. Most of the time it's a chapter or a section. At the most, it's a full year, and that could be for like a final, right? You're going to be focusing on that content knowledge. So, really looking at the chapters of your textbook. What content have you learned? Typically you're giving plenty of time. So meaning, the number of questions that you have for the time that you have to answer them, it relatively reasonable. It's not like super time crunch, super fast pace. Then, of course, this is my favorite one. You can get partial or extra credit on a lot of your high school tests. And the reason for that is because they're human graded. So, for example, if you're doing a math equation and you have all the work right, but then the answer is wrong, your teacher might look at it and say, oh, okay, she understands the steps, but didn't get the answer. I'm going to give partial credit for this. human graded allows for that. They can look for the nuances in your answers. And then of course, it's just one element of your overall grade. So, it's part of a multitude of things that your teacher's looking at when they're giving you that final grade. Now, standardized tests are a bit different than that. It's covering years of material, some stuff that you may have even learned back in middle school. It's not only jumping around between the years of material, but also the subject matter. So like between different topics within those subjects. It's really testing your testing strategy. So yes, some content knowledge, of course, is going to be important, but really it's going to kind of see if you know the way to answer the questions. They're also rigorously timed. We'll talk about that in a little bit too, but there's a lot of questions and not a lot of time to do them in. So it's really easy to, make mistakes and get stressed out. There also are right or wrong answers. So every question is going to have one correct answer for the multiple choice and the rest will be incorrect. And then of course it's machine graded. So, whereas you would get that nuanced human touch with your high school classes, a robot is going to say that, yes, you're right, or no, you're wrong when you take one of these. And then as if that wasn't stressful enough, of course, your final score is the only thing that matters. It's not taking a broad look at everything that you've done. It's just looking at this single test. So that's why the SAT, the ACT, and other standardized tests are so difficult for so many students. And that's okay. It's normal. You've learned one way to take tests your entire life, and now you're being judged on something completely different. So totally understandable to be like, what the heck is going on with that? So now I know you're probably thinking, this is the question that we get all the time at the Princeton review. Which test should I take, right? The SAT or the ACT? That's not always the way that we hear it, though. Sometimes it comes across as like, oh, I'm a soccer player and I'm really good at English, or I'm great at math and I want to study pre-law, or I love science, but I'm also an artist. Like, what test should I take? We always want to know all about our students. So like any students that are taking prep courses with us, we want to know all about their personality, the things they're interested in. But we kind of want to reframe the question, why not both? And you may be thinking, oh, well, I really don't want to take two tests. Fair. You also may be thinking, oh, you're a test prep company. Of course, you want us to prepare for two tests. The two tests really are so similar that we don't even recommend students prep for both. If you were to take, for example, one of our courses on either test, it would get you very well prepared to take the other test. If you prepared for the SAT, you'd be very well prepared for the ACT too. Most importantly, taking both tests just strengthens your college applications by giving admissions officers more information about you. And one other thing I just want to say about that too is we'll talk about practice tests a little bit later. We do offer those on our website and they're free and you can take them at any time. So if you don't want to go in and take two full official tests, one SAT and one ACT, you can take practice tests on our website anytime. And then you can kind of get a feel for which one you're more comfortable with, which one you do better on, and then you can kind of go from there. All right, so now we're moving on to our next big idea, the similarities between and the differences between the SAT and the ACT. So if you're thinking about taking both, you definitely want to understand the similarities and differences. They're much more similar than they are different. So that's kind of a good thing. When you're, like I said, we're preparing for one, you'll be well on your way to preparing for the other. And we'll talk about the similarities and differences and to see just how similar they are. So when we look broadly at both tests, they're pretty similar. Some of the toughest aspects of the test too are pretty much the same. So first, the timing, 3 hours of testing time. Nothing that anybody regularly does in life takes 3 hours at a clip, right? So, a musical has an intermission, a football game has halftime. So, you do get breaks on these exams, but it's not like doing something fun, like seeing a musical or watching a sporting event. You're testing for 3 hours, sitting in an uncomfortable chair. You may be in an unfamiliar school, you're staring at a test booklet. That's why part of the practice test thing, it's good to take practice tests. And that's why they're a key component of our courses. but building that stamina to be able to manage a 3-hour test. It's a long time. You got to get used to taking a test that's that long. Another similarity that both tests have, that they're mostly multiple choice, right? Multiple choice questions may seem annoying, but they're also going to give you a bit of an advantage because you might be able to get the correct answer by eliminating wrong answers. So using the process of elimination, one of our core strategies that we teach, and even better, you can use that for pretty much any multiple choice question. So they can be annoying, but there's advantages to them. Finally, the SAT and ACT both cover specific subjects, so you'll know exactly what you're facing. It's not like it's going to be a huge, broad range of subjects. You really are covering math and language and reading, writing, that general section of school. So for the math, you're going to be covering high school math through algebra 2 with a few like trigonometry questions. They also both have reading sections they have advanced passages that you have to read with complex questions relating to those passages. They also both have sections that require you to fix grammar and structure in passages. The SAT calls it language and writing. The ACT calls it English. Generally the same idea. The ACT might seem different because it does have a dedicated science section, but the ACT reading section does have science passages, and they're very similar to that science section in the ACT. And it also contains math questions about charts and graphs based on scientific data. So when you think about the differences about the two tests, it's important to remember that they do have much more in common than they do different. All right, so breaking down the ACT section by section, this is one of the key differences. The essay is optional, so I do want to mention that. So you won't necessarily be sitting the entire time if you decide not to take the essay. The essay is fairly straightforward and another way to separate yourself. So, you're certainly welcome to take it, especially if you feel like writing is a strong suit for you. The thing to notice here, though, is how long you have to answer each question in the different sections. You're going to start with the 75 questions in just 45 minutes. So that's really rigorously timed. The slowest time per question that you can have is the 60-minute, or in the slowest time that was within the test is 60 math questions in 60 minutes. That's still having to do math for each question. And so it's like a minute for each question for a whole hour. And then those reading and science sections require you to look at multiple passages and then answer those 40 questions about the passages in 35 minutes. So that's pretty rigorously timed. Just something to keep in mind if you're deciding between the two tests. If you feel like that's going to be a particular stressor for you, maybe the ACT isn't the right option for you. But again, taking a practice test is a good way to kind of get that feel. All right. So let's look at the SAT. If you look at the bottom, there's 154 questions total on the SAT, and there's no essay on the SAT at all. It's not even optional. So you have to answer 154 questions in 180 minutes. Now we're comparing that to the ACT. It's like, ooh, that seems like so much time, but it's not really a relaxing time frame either. It is a little better. But in those 65 minutes for the reading section, you have to answer 52 questions across 5 passages. And the math section might seem a little more leisurely compared to the ACT's 1 question per minute, but don't forget there's a section that you don't get to use a calculator for. Another key difference between the two tests is reflected in the amount of time per question. So the SAT asks similar questions on similar content, but in a more convoluted manner. So, okay, the ACT is going to ask a math question like, there is a length of rope 18 inches long, is divided into 3 equal sections. What is the length of one section, right? So a pretty straightforward question. The ACT is going to ask it in a much more convoluted way and say, Joe, Bob, and Steve walk into a sandwich shop and they decide to split a sub sandwich. The sandwich costs them $18. Joe, Bob, and Steve will split the cost of the sandwich evenly before tax or tip. How much are they? It gets very wordy. So you might start to be like, what sandwich costs $18? Which, although I don't know, I feel like they do these days. And can't people get their own sandwiches? And then you're distracted. right? You're supposed to be doing math. So if you get easily distracted, the SAT is going to try to get you. Lots of words and asking things in a complicated way. But if you feel overwhelmed by the rapid fire questioning, then the ACT might be a little tougher for you. But most students with practice and preparation can adjust the difference between the two tests and can do either one with some preparation. They're really made with the same idea in mind, and that is that the test writers are trying to trick you. Rude, rude, rude. I know. We don't like that they're trying to trick us. But they are. And I can give you a simple example of that. This is just a quick one. So if you look at this equation, right, if x plus 7 equals 10, then what does x plus 5 equal? Now, some of you may have just quickly thought 3, right? Even if you know that answer is not the right answer to the question, when you're introduced to algebra, you're always solving for x, right? So your mind might initially jump to, ooh, x is 3, because that's what x is in the equation. And then the standardized test writers know that, so they're going to take a very simple, seemingly simple question and try to confuse you by asking something a little bit different. A lot of students will get a question like this wrong just because they're rushing, or they're feeling that pressure to answer the questions, and they're just looking at the first part of the question and not the question in its entirety. And that's how 3 will be an answer choice in the multiple choice section, and you'll say, oh, I know that, and just go for it. And that's where they get you. So we like to try to make sure that that's not happening to you. So some of the strategies we'll go over later in the presentation will give you some tips and tricks for kind of getting over this. Just keep in mind that these two tests are not difficult because of the concepts that they're presenting, but they're difficult because of the way that they're presenting the concepts. They're presenting these things in a difficult way. They're built to make you make mistakes. And that's why a lot of the common mistakes that students make, they're really simple things that can be kind of alleviated. You'll get questions wrong because it's not that you're not going to get questions wrong because you don't know the quadratic equation or because of a difficult vocabulary word. You probably know those things, right? But you're going to do a few small things that will mess yourself up, especially if you're going in having never practiced and not really knowing what to expect. So answering too quickly, like in that previous math question, if you're just like, ooh, x plus whatever, x plus 7 equals 10, x is 3, and you see 3. Simple mistake by just reading too quickly and not really looking at what the question is asking you. Choosing answers carelessly. So like not noticing the difference between a semicolon and a colon, or the grammar section, even though you know the grammar rules, right? So you know them, but you're, choosing the answer carelessly because you're not really looking. Doing work in your head is a big one. You're allowed to have the scratch paper. So it's really important to not do the work in your head. There's all sorts of distractions when you're taking this test. People tapping their pencils, shuffling papers, a siren outside, somebody's shoes tapping in a hallway. All of those things can really mess up your train of thought if you're trying to do the work in your head, and can lead to careless mistakes. Misreading the problem is also an issue. So like reading the question is that you need to find the increase instead of the decrease, or looking for the characterization that an author would give instead of the one that they would not give. So they really try to mess with you by making those questions tricky. So if you misread that problem, that is an issue. And then also you might just not understand what they're asking you. And I don't mean that you don't know a grammar rule or you forget a math formula, but you might just not know what the specific task the question is asking you. And these are the reasons that it's so difficult to get a perfect score. And this is also why these tests really need to be prepared for rather than studied for. You have to think about getting ready for the SAT or ACT more like getting ready for a marathon or a musical recital, right? When we have our prep classes, we base things heavily on repetition and drills. And that's so that you're prepared to answer these different types of questions and these common mistakes. You're prepared to fend them off, just really easily, because you know what's coming, you know how they're trying to trick you. When you prep, we want to make sure that we're feeling confident. What is a good score? So this is another question for the chat. So there's the concordance chart for the SAT and the ACT to help you out kind of comparing if the SAT, the highest score is a 1600, the ACT is highest score is a 36. Colleges use these charts to compare the SAT and ACT scores. So I would love for you to throw in the chat, what do you think a good score would be to get into college? Pop it in the chat for me. What do we think? Good score.
Someone said 1200, 1400, 1500, 1300.
Lofty aspirations here. I like it.
1500 plus.
All right.
Depends on the school, someone said.
Ooh. Oh, see, that's good. Okay. So a good score is the score that's going to get you into your dream college, right? So all the scores that you mentioned could be good scores, right? I really want you to think about this and keep this in your mind. A good score is the score that gets you into your dream college. And this is the way that you have to think about it when you approach the SAT or the ACT, right? Some students are just pushing for that next level, those extra 10 points. And when you're feeling that pressure on yourself, that can lead to more stress and more simple mistakes. So you need to find the score that helps you in the admissions process. For some students, that's going to be a 1090. For others, it's a 1360 or a 25 on the ACT versus the 31 for others. But it's not about the numbers. It's really about the college that you're applying to, and identifying those and seeing what their average scores are. So that's something that's really important to do, because any of those scores that you mentioned could be good scores, and scores lower than what you mentioned could be good scores. So here's a chart that we like to show where there's a lot of commonly applied to schools, and it gives you sort of a sample of where your scores can take you. So in addition, of course, to a strong high school transcript and your personal statement and your activity list and all that, these scores are showing the middle 50th percentile for each school, right? So 25% of incoming first year students had test scores below the lowest number, and 25% had the test scores above the highest test number. So if you're inside this middle sort of 50th percentile here, then you have that score that's going to get you into that college. Doesn't mean you're guaranteed to get in, but it means that your scores are going to be competitive when they're looking at your application. Of course, they're looking at all the different elements, but you want your goal to be that your SAT or ACT score is that it's an element of your application that the admissions officers don't have to worry about, right? They see it and they're like, great, good scores. And they can look at the other parts and really show yourself in your best light when, you're with your grades and your letters of recommendation and all that good stuff. You can find the average test scores for any school by visiting the PrincetonReview.com and searching that school. You can also begin building a dashboard of schools that you're interested in right on the website, and you can compare those scores to your practice test scores. So if you take a practice test, that gives you a little bit of a leg up. We know that this is going to give you a leg up when you know that what your target score is. You're going to be more successful in improving your score if you know what score you need to get into your dream school. All right, so now we're going to move on to big idea 3. We've talked about the ways that the tests are similar and different, how you can start making sense of them to prepare. And now we're going to talk about improving those scores. So we are going to cover a couple of basic strategies that you can use to improve your scores. This obviously isn't everything that we teach at the Princeton Review, because we just have a little bit of time left together. And some of our courses are between 18 hours and 36 hours. So this is just a small sampling, but we can definitely give you some strategies that will help you even if you were to take the test tomorrow. The sample problems that we're about to look at come from our practice test. So just so you're aware of that, this is the first one. So before we discuss strategies for individual questions, we're going to kind of talk about overall testing strategy. We have lots of general test taking strategies that we like to share at the Princeton Review. We have them not only for SAT and ACT, but these first couple of strategies will also work for PSAT, AP exams, and if you're taking upper level or graduate level, MCAT, LSAT, GARE, all that. So this is one that we like to call letter of the day. This is a question we get a lot of. What if I don't know the answer? Should I leave it blank? Definitely not. A blank answer is considered wrong on both the SAT and the ACT. So it means we never want to leave anything blank. Even if you're making a completely random guess, put something down. It's going to help you be much more successful than leaving blanks. And it's also going to give you a little bit of a advantage if you know how to guess. So I'm going to show you two approaches to making random guesses. And I want you to think about which one is going to be the best way. So if you look at the slides here, I kind of went ahead, so hopefully you didn't see the answer. But which one do you think is going to be the better of the two options? The column on the left, where it's all the same, or the column on the right, where you're kind of mixing it up? And you can throw your answers in the chat. Oh, we saw the answer.
I saw it.
Ugh, fine. That's
one.
I know, that's fine. You guys, that was on me. Totally fine. Yes, so the answer is the left. And if you're thinking about like just 10 questions, it's not going to be that consistent. But if you're thinking about hundreds of questions over the entire test, you're going to want to use the left side approach. We call that letter of the day. And when you sit down for your test, ACT, SAT, whatever standardized test you're taking, pick a letter, A, B, C, or D, whatever you're feeling that day. And that's going to be your go-to when you don't know the answer or if you run out of time. The letter of the day works for two reasons. You're not going to be spending precious time rushing to figure out an answer. And the second advantage is a little sneaky. If you choose one letter again and again for the whole test, 25% of the choices are going to be that letter. So you are essentially locking in those answers. This is the kind of overall strategy that's going to help you maximize your success before you start looking at individual sections or question types. All right, so reading strategy. I just want to make sure, all right, 43 minutes and we still have some time, so we can kind of go over this. So a more specific strategy. There's no question attached to this. We're giving a reading strategy and we don't have time to go over a whole passage, but this does show sort of a fundamental reading strategy that we teach, whether it's SAT or ACT, that will help you. So we like to use the process of elimination to rule out any choices that are incorrect. And there's certain ways that reading questions are phrased that you should look out for. There's a lot more to breaking down the reading comprehension questions, but any answer choice that uses always or all is probably wrong. You should be wary of answer choices that use any phrases that come directly from the passage. Remember, the SAT and the ACT want to trick you. So if you identify a phrase that comes exactly from the passage, you're going to think, ooh, that's the right answer. It's usually a trap. Just because it's in the passage doesn't mean it's correct. We also can rule out anything that could be true but isn't explicitly stated in the text. So the SAT and the ACT clearly note that you do not need outside information to answer the reading question. So if it isn't in the passage, throw it away. You don't need it. And then the most important thing to remember about the reading section is the answer that you want to be correct might not be there. Multiple choice answers are not a customizable feature, unfortunately. You have to select what's there. So you might not have the answer that you love, but it's still the best choice or perhaps the least bad. That's likely to give you the correct answer. All right, a grammar strategy. These are going to help you in the writing and language section on the SAT and the English section on the ACT. You might sit down and think that these sections, and you sit down to them and think that, okay, I'm going to focus on every grammar rule I ever learned. Not necessary. As soon as you see an underlined portion with a number in the passage, you're going to just go and look at the answer choices. So look at what's different in the choices, right? Since the verbs are changing in the answer choices, you're going to check the subject to be sure that the subject and verb are consistent in number. And that's really the only thing you need to care about in this question. So products is the subject. So the verb has to be plural, right? Remember, you can write in your test booklet. So that means you can mark, each answer or as singular or plural. And you'll see singular, singular. A is singular, B is singular, C is plural, and D does not have a verb. So that makes C the correct answer. If you see this explanation, you think it's simple, I want you to think about why students might miss a question like this. They're not just asking about proper grammar, they're trying to trick you. If you notice, the sentence puts the phrase of either type between the noun and the verb, and that's done deliberately to mess with you, which again, not nice. You're thinking either type, you're going to try to conjugate that with the verb. If you read the sentence too quickly, it'll sound right, but would be actually wrong. So answering those SAT writing and ACT English questions, it doesn't just take remembering grammar, it really is identifying the rules and the ways of how the test is asking you those questions. Important to keep in mind. All right, quick math strategy. So quite frequently, the SAT and the ACT will, mess you up with the math questions by making you do math. Take this word problem. This is about a rug. First of all, it would be weird to know a rug's area and the relationship between its width and its length, but not its width and length. This phrasing makes you think that, makes you think about it differently. So simplify it, right? Start with the formula for area of a rectangle. Area equals length times width. And we know that the area is 80. So the formula is length times width equals 80. You're conditioned in high school to make this an algebra problem, but you should avoid that because it's a trap. Use the PETA method. Plug in the answer, right? You have a formula and 5 possible answers right there. We know one of the answers is right. Plug them in, plug it into the formula. So you can write above the formula and plug the answers in. And you can start with, see, right in the middle, the length or the answer choice is 16. So the width is 16 minus 2 or 14. Using this area formula, length times width, multiply 16 by 14, that's 244, which is too big. You can eliminate not only C, but D and E as well right there, since they are large numbers. And now go to B, the length is 10, so the width is 10 minus 2, or 8, which makes the area 10 times 8, which equals 80. And that is the number you are looking for, and that makes B the correct answer. We should also mention that A is the correct width, which makes it one of those classic trap answers, like gotcha answers. If you made a formula and confused the length and the width, you'll see the answer you got by not doing the correct math. So they're really making the questions more complicated, even when the math is actually fairly simple. So think about that using that PETA strategy, that plug in the answer. You've got the answers there, you know one is correct. You use those answers to your advantage. All right, one final strategy that I want to share about the SAT, the ACT, or if you're going to take both of them, is to prep, right? So here first, we're looking at the dates of the test, and you'll see them for the 2022, 2023, and then 2023 dates for the ACT as well. 7 specific dates. If you're wondering which date is best for you, you want to think about which test date you want to take, and then you want to kind of work backwards. You'll be submitting applications to colleges no later than January of senior year, and likely in November if you're applying early decision. So you'll need to have your SAT and ACT score set before you do all of the work of applying, like writing your essays and getting your application perfected. So that means you should be done with taking these tests by the start of your senior year, ideally. And you should always give yourself a chance to take it again, just in case, you have that day, like your alarm clock doesn't go up, or you're not feeling well, or your calculator runs out of battery, whatever weird thing might happen. It's good to have a backup date as well. You should plan to take the test for the first time in the spring of your junior year, and then the second time in the summer before your senior year, or in the fall of your senior year. That's what we tend to recommend. And since we're talking about prepping, there's lots of ways to prep. We have a lot of courses and tutoring and programs that are great, but there's also a ton of resources out there. Any prep you do for the test is going to help you. So you want to keep that in mind. The first option is to take a practice test, which I mentioned. Those are on our website, and you can do them literally anytime. You can sign up for it tonight, tomorrow, do it over the weekend. You could take one of each. They're free. And the great thing is you get an immediate score report from us, and it'll tell you how you did. And that is going to help you decide either which test you prefer to take or what things you need to work on, which is really great. Getting a prep book. So this is a very low cost solution. We have SAT and ACT prep books that are fantastic. You will need to work through things on your own, but a prep book is definitely a good tool to have. And then of course a self-prep. So you can do self-paced courses like we offer. You'll still have to do things on your own, but having that calendar and resources can help. It does still rest entirely on your shoulders. Self-prep can also include things like Khan Academy, and there's free resources on our YouTube channel, tons of tips and tricks as well. So if you're going to self-prep, that's another little tool to add to your tool belt. And then of course, taking a course. A lot of students find taking a course helpful because they're getting that instruction from a real person. It gives them that regular time devoted to taking the test, or to practicing for the test. You have an instructor that can answer questions. And if you want to take it further, we recommend tutoring. If you really want to take it to the next level, they'll work with you one-on-one, and the program will be tailored to your needs. So just some ways to prep. Whether you prep with us, whether you prep with someone else, you definitely want to prep. You want to make sure that you're planning your prep, and you're not really going to succeed at the SAT or ACT just by using what you learned in high school. You can be brilliant and super smart, maybe you are a great test taker. Bully to you then. That's great, but most people are going to need to understand some of those tricky traps that they try to get you, and really getting into those questions and strategies that are going to help you get the score that you want to get into the school of your dreams. And that's really the key, is using that prep to help you get the score that you need. So, all right, we're gonna wrap things up in a minute here. We'll definitely have some time for questions, but I want you to think back to that admissions officer when we were first starting, right? Reading all of the applications from across the country. And when they see your application, you want to make sure that they're not looking at your SAT or ACT score worriedly. They'll have to really carefully balance all the other parts of your application, from your grades to your extracurriculars, your essays. That one objective number that they're comparing students across the country with, you want that to be a benefit to your application. So we talked about how you'll be able to prepare for the SAT and the ACT, how to improve your chances of getting into the college that you want. And think about those big ideas, right? The truths and misconceptions. Remember that the tests are much more similar than they are different. Colleges are still wanting to see those SAT and ACT scores, and they're wanting to see good ones, strong scores based on what they're looking for at their particular school. The similarities and differences, right? We said tests are much more similar than they are different. If you prep for one, you're well on your way to being prepped for the other. Key strategies for standardized testing will work for any standardized test, including the SAT or the ACT. And you have to remember that both tests are written to trick you. So if you keep that in mind, you'll be able to prep more appropriately and use them as tools to get into the school that you want to get into. And don't forget that key thing I said, that a good score is the score that gets you into your dream college, right? It doesn't have to be a 1400. It doesn't have to be. Maybe your school is, but maybe not. And that's the most important thing to think about when you're working on improving your scores, which is our last big idea. You just need the right overall strategy and strategies for individual questions, and your scores will come up. And that's really the key. So hopefully after today, you're feeling more confident in beginning your test prep, and you're ready to decide which test you want to take, and using them as a tool to get into the school of your dreams. So we do have a little bit of time for some questions. So if anybody has anything that they'd like to ask, you can certainly pop it in the chat. I would like to recommend and advise you to check out our socials. You'll see on the bottom of the screen, we're on Instagram, which we got a new cool social media person, and he's doing some great stuff. So you can find some fun tips and tricks on our Instagram and on our Twitter. And I also highly recommend our YouTube. I know I did mention it briefly before, but tons of great information on our YouTube channel, short video clips from everything from paying for college, college admissions questions, Q&As about different specific schools. Our editor-in-chief, Rob Franick, covers a whole bunch of topics. And then there's even specific strategies for questions. So if you're doing some of that self-prep, it's a great place to check. So again, my contact information is here. So if you would like to reach out to me, I would love to hear from you. And then if we have any questions in the chat.
There are a few questions.
Okay, yeah, send them to me, Rebecca. Let's do it.
Okay, so one of the questions that popped up earlier was there were a few people wondering if, since it's being recorded, if this will be sent out to everybody that was here today.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. And our fabulous librarian will have a copy of it as well, and she will be able to share with anybody who missed it. And you can feel free to share it with anybody you feel like it might be beneficial for.
Perfect. Another question. Let me see. So someone asked, when should we prepare for the SAT, and when should we take the test?
Yeah, so you're going to want to try to take the test the first time by the spring of your junior year, and then if you are hoping to take it a second time, the summer or early fall of your senior year. And you want to think about your prep by working backwards from your testing date. So you want to bump your prep right up to the test. So if you're taking a course, then you're going to want to think about, okay, well, when does this course start? If you're doing something like tutoring or self-paced, you kind of have a little more flexibility there. You can either work with a tutor or decide on your own, but you want to make sure that you give yourself enough time to work through all the material you want to work through. We usually say, 4 to 8 weeks. It really depends on your schedule. But yeah, you want to bump it right up to that testing date. So think about when you're going to take the test and then work backwards.
And another question that popped up from Sarah, she said, for the ACT, is it likely that students run out of the given time?
Yeah, so that is definitely a common thing that happens. Sarah, thank you for asking. The timing is so rigorous with the ACT. It's really kind of tough. So that's why that practice test is really a very helpful thing, because it gives you that sort of sense of what you're coming up against. And some people are going to feel fine with it. Some people are going to be like, nope, this is not for me. And then the SAT may be a better choice for you. But really taking those practice tests is going to give you sort of that self-knowledge to help you decide which is going to be your best fit.
And then Aaliyah asked, if we're taking the test in the spring, when do you think that we should start prepping? Are a few months too much to prepare? Yeah,
so again, that you really want to bump your prep up against the date that you're taking the test. We usually recommend 4 to 8 weeks beforehand. If you're somebody who's going to work through it a little faster, then maybe you're going to go 4 weeks. If you're somebody who's going to kind of spread out a little more, 8 weeks. You can also look at our course schedules to, even if you're not going to take one, just to get an idea of like how we pace them. So you could visit our website for that.
Francisco asked, how long is the SAT valid for?
Oh, that's a great question.
Really good one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm actually not 100% sure on that. You've got me, but I'm pretty sure that if you've taken them, I don't think that they can say untake your scores. I mean, I can't imagine that if you're trying to use them like 20 years later that they like maybe they wouldn't accept them. But Francisco, if you want me to find that out for sure and message you, I'd be happy to do that. You can drop your email in the chat or send it to me in like a little private message, and I'm happy to find out for you.
And then Hillary asked, do schools weigh one test higher over the other?
So great question. The SAT tends to be more popular on the East Coast and the West Coast, and the ACT tends to be more popular in the middle of the country, but every school will accept either. So any school that you apply to, if they want to see a score, you're planning to submit a score, you can truly submit either one. They're not going to penalize you for, oh, we're on the East Coast and I took the ACT. Am I going to get in trouble for that? No, not at all. They'll take either.
And Aaliyah asked another great question. She said, so if we take it twice, will our better score be counted?
Yeah, so that's where that super scoring comes in, which this is an advantage for both the schools and also for the students. They'll take the highest section score. So your highest math score and your for the SAT and your highest writing and language score, and they'll put those together for your super score. So it's going to put you in the best light. So yes, that's another reason to take it more than once, especially if you take it one time and you do, you're not let's say you don't get the math score that you want. Well, you can prep more on math in the meantime, take it again, raise that score a little bit, and then that's the score that you'll use. Not every single school does this, but most schools do this. And then again, they can report that they have higher scores as for their accepted students. So it's kind of a plus for both. Did we have any other questions?
I think the questions have slowed down. Last call, any question?
Yeah, I mean, again, if you think of something later.
How long does it take to typically get back scores?
Yeah, I want to say it's a few weeks, and then yeah, you get your scores. I'm so sorry. There was a bug crawling on my tissue box. I had to get it while I could see it. Yeah, so it's, I believe, a few weeks after you've taken the test that your scores will be available. You don't have to pay to get your answers.
You don't.
And if you take a practice test, those scores, if you take it with us, at least I can say, the scores will be available immediately upon completion. And it comes with this interactive score report. So it's not only going to show you how you did, but it'll show you areas where you can improve. We also do free score consultations. So if you want to go over that, you can reach out to us.
So Destiny said that her English teacher told her 2 weeks if you pay extra.
So that's a good question. They might still have that as an option if you need your scores faster. I can find that out too, Destiny. Again, if you want to pop your email, send it over to me. I can find out for sure. I know in the past that was an option, but College Board is always changing things, so we can definitely find that out for you. All right, well, I want to be respectful of everybody's time, so I do want to wrap it up. Again, if you have, really fast, I saw one more question. Tests are not on the computer yet. If you're a freshman freshman this year, then they will be digital. And then you don't want to take it too many times. We recommend the max 3. All right. But yes, I'm respectful of everyone's time. I want to send you home. Oh, Destiny, I got your email. Perfect. I will make sure to reach out to you. And yeah, I really appreciate everybody's time tonight. I hope you found this informative and helpful. Again, any questions that come up, if you think of something later, please feel free to reach out. I am here to help. And I really hope to see some of you on our next session, right? We've got a couple more coming up. And it's been so great spending some time with you guys tonight. I really wish you all the best in your journey to getting into your dream college. It's very stressful, but you can do it, and armed with the right knowledge, it'll all be okay.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to put this link in the chat is to the library's calendar. Our next session with Princeton Review will be October 25th. It's Finding Your Best College Fit. And then we have another one on November 29th, and that's all about writing your college essay. So if you click on the link, fortleelibrary.org events, you'll find those registration information for those. Can certainly always reach out to me personally, and I can get you in touch with Lisa as well if you don't have her contact for whatever reason. So thank you everybody for coming. I'm going to stop the recording now, but we will send this out to everybody who's registered.